The engines of the ship called Midnight Talon hummed softly as it approached the dead planet Koros. Inside the cockpit, Jia watched through the view screen. Her yellow eyes narrowed. Her scaled fingers tapped on the control panel. "We're entering orbit now," she said to no one. Her voice was rough from lack of use. "Any signs of my target?" "Scanning," replied the ship's computer. One small craft detected on the planet's surface, matching engine signature to known vessel of smuggler Han Jun. Probability of match, 87%. Jia smiled, showing sharp teeth. Han Jun was worth 50,000 credits to the right people. With that money, she could finally stop hunting. Maybe buy a small moon and live alone in peace. "Prepare for landing," she ordered, "and run another check on my weapons." As the ship descended through the thin atmosphere, Jia studied the planet information on her screen. Koros had once been a mining world until the companies took everything of value and left. Now it was just rocks, dust, and abandoned tunnels. The perfect hiding place for someone who didn't want to be found. The air outside was barely breathable, but Jia's Talon biology could handle it for a few hours. She secured her breathing mask anyway, and checked the power on her plasma rifle. Her scaled skin shimmered in the dim light of the ship as she pulled on her armored vest. "Ship, maintain orbit and be ready for quick extraction," she commanded. "If I don't return in 6 hours, send my location to the guild." "Understood," the computer replied. "Good hunting, Jia." She snorted at that. The ship's AI had been programmed to say encouraging things, but they rang hollow after 10 years alone in space. There had been a time when Jia hunted with others of her kind. That time was long past. The landing ramp extended with a hiss, and hot, thin air rushed in. Koros had 3 small suns, all distant, and they cast multiple shadows as Jia stepped onto the dusty surface. Her scanner pointed her toward an old mining facility 2 kilometers away. Han Jun's ship was hidden there. Jia moved quickly across the barren landscape. Her boots left clear prints in the dust. No wind here to cover her tracks. It didn't matter. By the time Han Jun saw them, it would be too late. The mining facility was a collection of crumbling buildings and rusty equipment. Jia crouched behind a broken machine and studied the area with her enhanced vision. Han Jun's ship was there, partially hidden under a torn piece of metal sheeting. But there was no movement, no signs of life. "Too easy," she muttered to herself, drawing her sidearm. Experienced smugglers like Han Jun didn't survive by being careless. She approached the ship carefully, scanning for traps. The hatch was open. Inside, the controls were still warm. Han Jun had been here recently, maybe just minutes ago. A trail of boot prints led from the ship to a dark tunnel entrance. Jia activated the light on her weapon and followed. The tunnel sloped downward, into the old mines. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and the air grew colder. Her scanner picked up faint energy readings ahead. Someone had set up equipment down here. Jia moved silently, her scaled feet making no sound on the rocky floor. After 20 years as a bounty hunter, stealth was second nature. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Mining equipment lay abandoned, and in the center stood a small shelter made of scrap metal. The scanner showed life signs inside. Just one person. Jia smiled again. 50,000 credits, waiting behind that thin metal wall. "Han Jun," she called out, her voice echoing. "The guild wants you. Come out now, and I won't have to drag your unconscious body back to my ship." There was no answer, but the life sign inside the shelter moved suddenly. Jia raised her weapon. Last chance to do this the easy way. A crash came from inside the shelter, followed by the sound of something falling. But it wasn't the voice of a hardened smuggler that Jia heard next. It was the sound of a human child crying. Jia stood frozen, her weapon still raised. The crying continued from inside the metal shelter. This made no sense. Han Jun was not known to travel with children. "Come out now," she ordered, keeping her voice firm. The crying stopped. After a moment, a small head peeked out from the shelter entrance. It was a human child, a boy with dark hair and wide eyes. His face was dirty, and his clothes were torn. He looked about 6 years old, though Jalai wasn't good at telling human ages. "Who are you?" Jalai asked, lowering her weapon slightly. "Where is Hanjun?" The boy stared at her, his eyes growing even wider at the sight of her scaled skin and yellow eyes. He spoke, but his words came out garbled. His translator wasn't working properly. Jalai sighed and switched her own translator to basic human language mode. "Can you understand me now?" The boy nodded slowly. "The bad man left," he said in a small voice. "He took food and water and locked me in here." Jalai cursed under her breath. Hanjun must have known she was coming and left the child as a distraction. It was a clever move. The guild's rules were clear. If you found an abandoned miner during a hunt, you had to ensure their safety before continuing. "How long have you been here?" she asked, fully lowering her weapon now. "Many sleeps," the boy said, holding up 7 fingers. "The bad man said he would come back, but he didn't." Jalai scanned the shelter. It was barely big enough for the child to lie down in. There was an empty water container and food wrappers on the floor. How had a human child survived in these harsh conditions for so long? "What's your name?" she asked. "Daho," the boy replied. He pointed at her. "You're not human." "No, I'm Talon. My name is Jalai." She stepped closer and the boy didn't back away. "Interesting. Most humans found Talons frightening. How did you get here, Daho?" "Our ship crashed. My parents were scientists. The bad men came and took them away." His voice was flat, as if he had accepted this terrible truth. Jalai checked her scanner again. The trail was getting colder. Hanjun could be off-planet by now. She needed to hurry if she wanted that bounty. "I need to find the bad man who was just here," she explained. "I'll take you to my ship first, then to a safe place where they can find your family." Daho shook his head firmly. "No family. They're gone. The bad men shot them." He made a gun shape with his fingers. Boom. Jalai felt something uncomfortable twist inside her chest. She had seen many terrible things in her years as a bounty hunter, but the boy's simple description of his parents' murder was somehow worse than all of them. "Come with me," she said, more roughly than she intended. "My ship has food and clean water." Daho followed her out of the shelter. Outside in the mining chamber, Jalai noticed something odd. There were fresh drill marks on one wall. Hanjun had been mining something valuable here. "Did the bad man dig in the walls?" she asked. Daho nodded. "Every day. He found shiny blue rocks. He got very happy when he found them. Nova crystals. They were rare and valuable, used in high-end ship engines." Now Jalai understood why Hanjun had come to this abandoned planet. As they walked back through the tunnel, Daho stayed close to her. The thin air didn't seem to bother him as much as it should have. Most humans would be gasping by now. "You're a hunter," Daho said suddenly. "My father told me about hunters. You find bad people." "Yes," Jalai replied. "For money." Daho thought about this for a moment. "Will you find the bad men who took my parents?" "That's not my job right now," Jalai said. When they reached the surface, she saw fresh ship tracks. Hanjun had left recently, maybe just as she arrived. She had missed him by minutes. Daho tugged at her arm and pointed up at the sky. "His ship went that way. I saw it." Jalai looked down at the human child with new interest. Perhaps he wasn't just a complication after all. Jalai led Daho across the dusty plain toward where her ship was waiting. The boy kept up with her quick pace without complaint, which surprised her. Human children were known to be slow and whiny. This one was different. "Your ship is called Midnight Talon *", Daho said suddenly. "It's a Class 4 hunter vessel with modified engines." Jalai stopped and stared at him. "How do you know that?" The boy pointed to his ear. I heard it talking to you when you landed. My hearing is good. That was impossible. The ship had been nearly a kilometer away, and its communications were secure. No human child should have been able to hear that, let alone understand what it meant. Before she could question him further, her scanner beeped with a warning. 6 life forms were approaching quickly from the east. Mercenaries, most likely. Han Jun must have called for backup. We need to run, she told Daho, grabbing his small hand. Bad people are coming. They had almost reached a ridge of rocks when the first shot hit the ground near them. Jalai pushed Daho behind a large boulder and pulled out her weapon. Stay down, she ordered. 6 armed figures were moving toward them, spreading out to cut off any escape. They wore the gray armor of the Crimson Syndicate, a criminal group known for their brutal methods. Jali fired twice, hitting one in the leg. The mercenary fell with a shout. We just want the boy. One of them called out. Give him to us, and you can go after Han Jun. So this was about Daho, not her. Interesting. What would criminals want with a human child? Jalai aimed carefully and fired again, hitting another mercenary in the shoulder. But as she moved to a new position, a shot caught her arm. Her weapon flew from her hand and landed in the open, too far to reach safely. Pain shot through her arm, but she ignored it. Without her weapon, they were in serious trouble. The mercenaries were closing in. I can get your gun, Daho whispered. No, Jalai hissed. You'll be shot. But the boy was already moving, crawling through a small gap in the rocks that Jalai hadn't even noticed. He was too small for the mercenaries to spot easily. Jalai pulled out her backup blaster, a small, short-range weapon that wouldn't be much use against armored opponents. She fired to keep the mercenaries' attention on her, while Daho crawled toward her fallen weapon. A mercenary shouted and pointed as he spotted the boy. Jali fired quickly, forcing the man to take cover. Daho reached the plasma rifle, grabbed it with both hands, and began dragging it back. One of the mercenaries broke from cover, running toward the boy. Without thinking, Jalai leaped from her hiding place and charged at the mercenary. She tackled him hard, both of them hitting the ground. Her clawed hand struck at his exposed neck, and he stopped moving. More shots flew around them. Jalai felt one graze her back as she rolled behind a rock. Daho had made it back to their hiding place with her weapon. He pushed it into her hands. 3 behind the big rock, 1 by the metal piece, 1 coming around the right side, he said quickly. Jalai stared at him. How do you? I can see them, he said simply. Like shadows moving, even through the rocks. She didn't have time to question this. Taking her rifle, she fired at the mercenary trying to flank them from the right. He fell with a cry. The others were calling to each other, planning to rush their position. Jalai knew they couldn't hold out much longer. When I say run, go to that cave, she told Daho, pointing to a dark opening in the cliff face. I'll be right behind you. She fired several shots to give them cover, then shouted, Run. Daho sprinted for the cave with surprising speed. Jalai followed, firing behind her. They made it inside just as more shots hit the rocks around them. In the dim light of the cave, Daho looked up at her bleeding arm. You got hurt because of me, he said softly. Jalai examined her wound. I've had worse, she replied. Then, after a moment, she added, You did well out there. The boy smiled, and for the first time, Jalai wondered if keeping this human puppy around might not be such a bad idea after all. Jali's ship, the Midnight Talon left Koros behind, its engines glowing blue against the black of space. Inside, Daho sat in the co-pilot's seat, his legs too short to reach the floor. His eyes were wide as he watched the stars streak by. We're going to Nexus Station, Jalai explained as she checked her wound. The bleeding had stopped, but her arm still hurt. It's a big space station where many ships stop. Han Jun will go there to sell his Nova crystals. Daho nodded, but his face showed confusion. His translator was still not working properly. Jalai sighed and tried again, speaking slowly. "We follow bad man to big space house." "I understand," Daho said. "But why did those people want me?" That was a good question. Jalai had been wondering the same thing. Human children weren't usually valuable in this part of space. "I don't know," she admitted. "What makes you special?" Daho touched his head. "My parents put something in here. They said it would help me talk to machines." Jolly frowned. That could explain his strange abilities. Hearing the ship from far away, sensing people through rocks. Some kind of tech implant, perhaps. If so, it could be very valuable. "We need to fix your translator," she said. "Then we can talk better." She opened a panel in the wall and took out a small device. It was a universal translator, better than the basic one built into her suit. She placed it gently on Daho's neck, where it stuck like a small patch. "Better?" she asked. Daho touched the device. "Yes, I can understand you clearly now," he said, his words coming through much more smoothly. "Thank you." "Good. Now tell me about your parents and what they put in your head." As the ship traveled through space, Daho explained that his parents were scientists who studied how brains connect with computers. They had created a special implant that let humans understand machine language. They tested it on him because children's brains learn faster. "The bad men came because they wanted to steal my parents' work," he finished. "They didn't know I had the implant." Jalai nodded slowly. This explained why Hanjun had kept the boy alive, and why those mercenaries wanted him. A human who could talk directly to machines would be worth a fortune. 3 hours later, they arrived at Nexus Station. It was huge, a spinning wheel of metal and lights with hundreds of ships docked around it. "Stay close to me," Jalai told Daho as they walked from their docking bay into the crowded main plaza. "And pull your hood up. We don't want anyone to notice you're human." Daho did as he was told, his small hand holding onto Jalai's belt. The station was full of different alien species, but humans were rare here. Jalai led them to a small shop tucked away in a corner. Inside, a 4-armed alien looked up from a workbench. "Jalai," he said, his voice like gravel. "Been a while. What do you need?" "Information, Krav." "I'm looking for Hanjun." Krav's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous prey. Word is he's made some powerful friends." His gaze shifted to Daho. "Who's the small one?" "My business," Jalai said flatly. Krav shrugged. "Hanjun docked 2 hours ago. He's meeting a buyer at the Broken Moon. Private room." Jalai placed some credits on the counter. "Thanks." As they left the shop, 2 station security officers blocked their path. One of them pointed a scanner at Daho. "Talons don't travel with human children," the officer said. "Let's see your papers." Jalai didn't have any papers for Daho. This was bad. If they were detained, Hanjun would escape. Suddenly, Daho pointed behind the officers and shouted, "The shop is on fire." As the officers turned to look, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed, and water sprinklers turned on. People ran in all directions. Daho pulled on Jalai's hand. "I told the station there's a fire," he whispered. "We have 10 minutes before the system realizes there isn't one." Jalai stared at the boy in amazement. He had spoken directly to the station's computer system. "The Broken Moon is this way," she said, leading them through the chaos. For the first time in years, Jalai felt something new, respect for someone else's abilities. The Broken Moon was a dark bar filled with the worst criminals in the station. Jalai kept Daho close behind her as they moved through the crowd. No one stopped them. Even drunk criminals knew better than to bother a Talon bounty hunter. "The private rooms are in the back," she whispered to Daho. "Hanjum should be in room 3. They reached a hallway with numbered doors. 2 large aliens with guns stood guard outside door number 3. "We can't just walk in," Jalai said, pulling back around the corner. "We need another way." Daho pointed to a small vent near the floor. I could fit through there. Jalai shook her head. Too dangerous. I can do it, Daho insisted. I'll just look and listen, then come back. Before she could stop him, he had pulled off the vent cover and slipped inside. Jalai waited nervously, her hand on her weapon. If anything happened to the boy. 5 minutes later, Daho crawled back out, his clothes dusty. Hanjun is selling the Nova crystals to a tall alien with purple skin, he reported. And he's talking about me. He said the human boy with the brain implant is worth more than the crystals. Jali frowned. If Hanjun was spreading word about Daho, every criminal in the sector would be looking for them soon. We need to catch him now, she decided, before he leaves. They waited until the guards were distracted by a drunk patron, then moved quickly toward the door. Jalai had her weapon ready as she kicked the door open. Inside, Hanjun and a purple-skinned Diraxian were standing over a table covered with blue crystals. Both looked up in surprise. Don't move, Jalai ordered, her weapon aimed at Hanjun. You're coming with me, smuggler. Hanjun smiled slowly. I was wondering when you'd find me, Jalai. I see you brought the boy. That saves us all some trouble. Something was wrong. Hanjun was too calm. Jali felt Daho tug on her arm. It's a trap, he whispered. There are more people coming. The door behind them slammed shut. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing 6 armed figures with weapons pointed at them. You've done well to get this far, Hanjun said. But now, I'll be collecting both the bounty on you and the price for the boy. The consortium is paying 10 million credits for a human who can talk to machines. Jalai pushed Daho behind her, but they were surrounded. There was no easy way out. You should have just taken the Nova crystals and been happy, she told Hanjun. The consortium will kill you once they have what they want. Hanjun shrugged. Maybe. But I'll be very rich first. One of the armed figures stepped forward to grab Daho. Jalai struck quickly, her clawed hand slashing across the man's chest. But another hit her from behind, and she fell to one knee. Don't hurt her, Daho shouted. The boy cares for you, Hanjun laughed. How sweet. Don't worry, we won't kill her right away. Daho's eyes narrowed. He looked at the ceiling, then at the walls. His lips moved silently, as if he was talking to someone. Suddenly, the lights went out. The room plunged into total darkness. What's happening? Hanjun shouted. The station's power to this section has failed, someone reported. In the darkness, Jali felt Daho's small hand grab hers. This way, he whispered. I can see in the dark with my implant. He led her to what felt like a wall. Then there was a click, and a hidden door opened. Maintenance passage, Daho explained as they slipped through. The station showed me where it was. Behind them, there was shouting and the sound of weapons firing blindly in the darkness. Once they were in the narrow passage, Daho touched a panel, and emergency lights came on. We need to get back to the ship, Jalai said. Hanjun will have the whole station looking for us now. Daho nodded. I can make the cameras not see us, he said confidently, and I locked the door behind us. They won't follow right away. Jalai looked at the small human child with new understanding. His powers went far beyond what she had imagined. He wasn't just talking to machines, he was controlling them. You're full of surprises, human puppy, she said with a rare smile. Jalai and Daho reached the Midnight Talon just as alarms began to sound throughout the station. They had managed to avoid security cameras, thanks to Daho's ability to control them. Now they needed to leave before someone locked down all the docking bays. Ship, prepare for emergency launch, Jalai ordered as they rushed inside. Launch preparations initiated. The ship's computer responded. Warning. Station security is activating docking clamps in 30 seconds. Jali jumped into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. Daho sat beside her, his eyes closed, and his face tight with concentration. "I'm telling the station that our ship has dangerous engine problems," he said. "They're releasing the clamps so we don't explode in the docking bay." The clamps released with a loud clank, and Jolly fired the engines. The Midnight Talon shot away from the station just as security ships began to mobilize. Setting course away from normal space lanes, Jolly said as she piloted the ship into the darkness between stars, "We need to hide somewhere while I figure out our next move." Once they were safely away, Jolly set the ship to autopilot and turned to Daho. The boy looked tired. Using his abilities seemed to drain his energy. "You need to tell me everything about your implant," she said. "No more secrets." Daho nodded and touched his head. "My parents were working for the Science Guild. They wanted to make humans better at working with machines. Most people use basic translators, but those only change words. My parents wanted something that could understand how machines think." He took a deep breath before continuing. "They made a special implant that connects to my brain. It doesn't just translate machine language. It lets me feel what machines feel. I can send my thoughts to them, and they listen." Jolly leaned forward. "This is very advanced technology. No wonder the consortium wants you." "The consortium paid Hanjun to tell them where my parents were working," Daho said, his voice getting angry. "He sold the information, and they sent raiders to our research station. They killed everyone, but they couldn't find me because I was hiding in a small space. And then Hanjun came back to look for valuable things." Jolly guessed. "Yes, he found me and realized what I was. He kept me alive to sell me to the consortium." Daho's small hands balled into fists. "I want him to pay for what he did to my parents." Jolly understood revenge. It was a simple, clean emotion, like hunger or pain. But she had never expected to see it so clearly in a human child. "The bounty on Hanjun is just for smuggling," she said. "But if he helped the consortium kill your parents, his crimes are much worse." Daho looked at her with serious eyes. "Will you help me get justice?" Jolly should say no. Her job was to catch criminals for money, not to right wrongs or help orphans. But something about this human child had changed her usual thinking. "Yes," she said finally. "We will catch Hanjun, and he will answer for all his crimes." Daho's face broke into a smile. Then he yawned, his small body finally showing its exhaustion. "You should rest," Jolly told him. "There's a sleep pod in the back of the ship." She showed him how to use the pod, and within minutes, the boy was asleep. Jolly watched him for a moment, thinking about how much trouble this small human had brought into her life. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret finding him. Back in the cockpit, she checked the ship's systems. Daho's abilities had done something unexpected. The engines were running at 110% efficiency, better than they ever had before. The navigation system had also been improved, showing routes she'd never seen. "He fixed you," she said to the ship. "Affirmative," the ship's computer replied, its voice somehow clearer than before. "The human child has enhanced multiple systems. He is remarkable." Jolly nodded. "Yes, he is." She set course for the Arjuna Nebula, where she knew a safe place to hide. There, she would make a plan to catch Hanjun, not just for the bounty now, but for Daho's justice. The Arjuna Nebula sparkled with blue and purple light outside the ship's view screen. Inside the Midnight Talon Jolly watched as Daho practiced the fighting moves she had shown him. 3 days had passed since their escape from Nexus Station. They were hiding in the nebula, using its radiation to block scanners that might be looking for them. During this time, Jolly had begun teaching Daho how to defend himself. "Your balance is wrong," she told him as he tried to copy her fighting stance. "Human legs are different from Talon legs. You need to stand wider." Daho adjusted his feet and tried again. This time, his movement was smoother as he struck at the air with his small fist. "Better," Jolly said. "You learn quickly." "My implant helps," Daho explained. I can see the patterns in how you move, like reading a machine, but with a body. Jia Lai was impressed. Most trainees took weeks to learn what Daho picked up in hours. His human body was still small and weak, but his mind was sharp. "Why are you teaching me to fight?" Daho asked as they took a break. "You're much stronger than me." Jia Lai handed him a water bottle. "Because I might not always be there to protect you, and enemies often ignore small opponents. That can be an advantage." She didn't add the other reason, that somehow, in the short time since finding him, she had begun to care what happened to this human child. It was a strange feeling for a lone hunter. After their practice, Daho sat in the cockpit, his eyes closed, hands hovering over the ship's controls without touching them. He was communicating with the ship again, making small improvements to its systems. "Ship, how much better is your navigation now?" Jia Lai asked. 27% more efficient," the computer replied. "Flight patterns are optimized for both speed and stealth. Weapons targeting is also improved by 32%. Jia Lai nodded. These improvements would help when they faced Han Jun again. And they would face him soon. Her sources have reported that he was meeting with consortium representatives on a remote moon called Varix in 2 days. "Daho," she said, "I think I know where Han Jun will be, but his meeting with the consortium will be heavily guarded." The boy opened his eyes. "We can still catch him. I can help. It will be dangerous." "I'm not afraid," Daho said firmly. "He helped kill my parents. He kept me in a box for days. I want to see him caught." Jia Lai studied the small human. In her 20 years as a bounty hunter, she had worked alone, trusting no one. Now she was planning a dangerous mission with a child. It made no sense, yet something told her that with Daho's abilities, they might succeed where she alone would fail. "Very well," she said, "but he'll need more training first." For the next day, Jia Lai taught Daho everything she could about surviving in combat situations. She showed him how to find cover, how to move quietly, and how to use his small size to hide in places adults couldn't reach. In return, Daho showed her what he could do with his implant. He could not only talk to machines but could see through security cameras, predict enemy movements based on their communication patterns, and even cause some systems to malfunction. "My father said I was the only successful test subject," he explained. "The implant has to be put in when the brain is still growing. Adult brains reject it." As they prepared for their mission, Jia Lai realized something had changed inside her. For years, she had hunted alone, speaking to no one except her ship's computer and information dealers. Now she was talking with the boy for hours each day. "Why did you become a bounty hunter?" Daho asked her during their meal on the final evening. Jia Lai was silent for a moment. No one had asked her that in a very long time. "My family was killed by raiders," she finally said. "Like yours. I was old enough to hunt down those responsible. After that, hunting criminals was all I knew how to do." Daho nodded, understanding in his young eyes. "So we're the same," he said simply. Jia Lai looked at the human child. Perhaps they were similar, despite being different species from different worlds. "Get some rest," she told him. "Tomorrow, we hunt." The moon Varix hung in space like a gray stone. Its surface was rocky and cold, with thin air that most beings couldn't breathe. In a valley between tall cliffs stood a single building, Han Jun's meeting place with the consortium. The Midnight Talon landed silently behind a ridge, 3 kilometers from the building. Jia Lai and Daho prepared for their mission in the ship's small cargo bay. "Remember the plan," Jia Lai said as she checked her weapons. "I go in first. You stay hidden and use the security systems to help me. No taking risks." Daho nodded, his face serious. He wore a small breathing mask and a dark suit that Jia Lai had cut down to fit him. At his neck was an improved translator, and on his wrist was a small computer that would help him connect to the building systems. "I'll be careful," he promised. But I want to see Han Jun's face when you catch him. Jia understood. Revenge was important in many cultures, including her own. The boy deserved to witness justice for his parents. They moved across the rocky ground, staying low and using the boulders for cover. As they got closer, they could see that the building was well guarded. 6 armed guards patrolled outside, and there were probably more inside. Too many to fight directly, Jia whispered. Daho pointed to a small structure near the main building. That's a power station, he said. I can feel it. If I can get to it, I can control the whole building systems. Jia didn't like it, but it was their best option. Stay behind me. They circled around, using the rough terrain to hide their approach. When they reached the power station, Jia quickly dispatched the single guard with a silent blow to the head. The guard fell without a sound. Inside, Daho went straight to the control panel. He placed his hand on it and closed his eyes. The lights on the panel began to blink rapidly. I'm in, he said after a moment. I can see everything. Han Jun is in the main room with 4 consortium agents. They're waiting for something, a shuttle that's coming with important people. Jia checked her weapon. Can you lock all the doors except the main entrance? Yes, and I can turn off the lights when you go in. Daho smiled. The guards outside are about to get an alert about a problem on the other side of the building. Sure enough, 4 of the 6 guards soon hurried away, responding to a false alarm. Now's our chance, Jia said. Stay here until I call for you. She moved quickly to the main building, taking down the 2 remaining guards with quick strikes before they could raise an alarm. At the entrance, she paused and spoke into her communicator. Ready. Inside the building, the lights suddenly went out. Jia, with her Talon night vision, could see perfectly as she entered. She heard confused shouts and the sound of people bumping into furniture. What's happening? That was Han Jun's voice. Security breach. Someone else shouted. Jia moved silently through the darkness toward Han Jun's voice. The consortium agents were firing their weapons blindly, the shots lighting up the room in brief flashes. It's her, Han Jun hissed. The Talon hunter. Jia fired her stun weapon twice, taking down 2 of the agents. A third rushed at her, and she met him with a powerful kick that sent him flying across the room. The 4th agent grabbed Han Jun. You led her here. This was a trap. No. Han Jun struggled against the agent's grip. I didn't know she would find us. Jia approached them slowly. Han Jun, you're wanted for smuggling, kidnapping, and now for your part in the murder of research scientists. The last agent pushed Han Jun forward and tried to run. Jia caught him with a shot to the leg, and he fell. Han Jun drew a small weapon from his boot. I won't go easily, Talon. But before he could fire, the room's emergency lights came on, blinding him. Daho stood in the doorway, his hand on a control panel. He's going to shoot from the left. Daho called out. He always pulls his shots that way. Han Jun fired, his shot going wide to the left just as Daho had predicted. Jia's return shot hit him squarely in the chest. Han Jun collapsed, the stun blast knocking him unconscious. Jia quickly secured all the prisoners. As she put restraints on Han Jun, Daho came to stand beside her. You were right, Jia said to the boy. He does pull his shots to the left. Daho nodded. I learned to see patterns when people move. It's part of what my implant does. He looked down at the unconscious smuggler, his face serious. He helped kill my parents. Now he'll pay. Jia put her hand on the boy's shoulder. Yes, justice will be done. The Central Guild station was busy with ships coming and going. In the bounty collection office, Jia stood tall as the payment was processed for Han Jun and the consortium agents. 50,000 credits for Han Jun, the guild officer said, plus 20,000 for the consortium agents. Largest payment you've ever collected, Hunter Jia. Beside her, Daho watched quietly, his hood pulled up to hide his human features. It had been 3 days since their mission on Varix. Han Jun was now in a high-security prison, facing charges not just for smuggling but for his role in the attack on the research station. As they left the office, Jia Lai looked down at the boy. "It's done. Justice for your parents." Daho nodded. "What happens now?" he asked in a small voice. It was a good question. Jia Lai had been a lone hunter for so long that she had never thought about what came after. With 70,000 credits, she could buy that small moon and retire as she had always planned. "We need to talk," she said. "Let's go back to the ship." On the Midnight Talon they sat in the cockpit, looking out at the busy station. Daho seemed smaller somehow, as if he knew that their time together might be ending. "The consortium will still be looking for you," Jia Lai said. "They want your implant technology. They won't stop." "I know," Daho replied. "I can hide. Maybe find a human colony somewhere far away." Jia Lai shook her head. "You wouldn't be safe, and hiding is no life for a child." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "There is another option." From a compartment in the wall, she took out a legal document and placed it on the console between them. "This is a Talon protection decree," she explained. "It's very old and rarely used, but it allows a Talon to claim guardianship of another being under our laws." Daho looked at the document, then back at Jia Lai. "You want to be my guardian?" "Yes. No one challenges Talon protection, not even the consortium." She cleared her throat, suddenly feeling awkward. "That is, if you want to stay with me." For a moment, Daho was silent. Then he smiled, a big bright smile that Jia Lai had rarely seen on his face. "I want to stay with you," he said. "We make a good team." Jia Lai felt something warm inside her chest. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten. The feeling of not being alone. They submitted the protection decree to the guild authorities. It caused quite a stir. A Talon claiming a human child was unheard of. But Jia Lai's reputation and her large credit balance ensured that no one objected too strongly. 1 month later, the Midnight Talon looked very different. Daho had his own small cabin now, with books and learning programs. The ship's systems had been completely upgraded with his help, making it faster and smarter than any other bounty hunter vessel. "Where are we going today?" Daho asked as he took his place in the co-pilot seat, which had been modified to fit him better. Jia Lai brought up a star map, a distress call from the Cygnus sector. "A transport ship with 30 people on board has been taken by pirates." "Rescue mission," Daho said with a nod. "I can help track their ship through the jump points." They had changed their work. No longer just hunting criminals for bounty, they now specialized in finding and rescuing people who had been taken against their will. There were, sadly, many such cases in the galaxy, and the rewards were still good. As the Midnight Talon left the station, Jia Lai looked over at her young partner. In just a short time, he had changed everything in her life. She had been the lone hunter, feared across 3 systems. Now she was something else. A teacher, a protector, maybe even a parent. "Ready for the jump?" she asked. Daho nodded, his hands moving over the controls. Course plotted. All systems optimal. "Then let's hunt," Jia Lai said with a smile. The ship accelerated into the darkness of space, carrying the most unusual team in the galaxy, a Talon bounty hunter and her human ally. The consortium still sought them sometimes, but they were always one step ahead, thanks to Daho's abilities and Jia Lai's experience. Together, they had found something neither expected: a family.